Hello. Welcome. Hello, everybody. It's nice to have you. Right. Hope everybody's doing okay. We are going for the second half of The Searcher of the End House by William Hope Hodgson. You do indeed, Fishy. Hello. Can I check, because Windows has updated and it's all gone weird, can I just check I am not clipping, but that I am at a reasonable volume for people? That would be appreciated. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Right. Okay. So, Carnacki, when younger, lived with his mum in a nice little house on the south coast. And then weird started to occur. And after a couple of nights of weird, Carnacki has packed his mother off, presumably to stay with someone, his aunt or something, and has spent a night investigating the place with the landlord. After said landlord did the whole "I'm checking the drains because I don't want you complaining" proof that some things never change. And after a misfire with the local gun, with his gun, the local police have turned up, and they are now involving a local inspector in their investigations. The landlord and Carnacki saw a ghostly baby and a ghostly woman, but they didn't see both. Welcome, Molly. I have literally just started. So, at the end of the first night with the police, we had the inspector ask me to give his man a glass of whiskey, and then he sent him on his beat. He stayed a short while with the landlord and me, and it was arranged he would join us again the following night and watch the well with us from midnight until daylight. Then he left us just as the dawn was coming in. The landlord and I locked up the house and went over to his place for a sleep. In the afternoon, the landlord and I returned to the house to make arrangements for the night. He was very quiet, and I felt he was to be relied on now that he had been salted, as it were, with his fright of the previous night. We opened all the doors and windows and blew the house through very thoroughly, and in the meanwhile we lit the lamps in the house and took them into the cellars, where we set them all about so as to have light everywhere. Then we carried down 3 chairs and a table and set them in the cellar where the well was sunk. After that, we stretched thin piano wire across the cellar, about 9 inches from the floor, at such a height that it should catch anything moving about in the dark. That's nasty, potentially. I can only assume that, clothes were a lot more robust then, because, God, can you imagine that? Thin trousers? Yike. When this was done, I went through the house with the landlord and sealed every window and door in the place, excepting only the front door and the door at the top of the cellar stairs. Meanwhile, a local wiresmith, that's brilliant. Every town should have one. A local wiresmith was making something to my order, and when the landlord and I had finished tea at his house, we went down to see how the smith was getting on. We found the thing complete. It looked rather like a huge parrot's cage without any bottom, of very heavy gauge wire, and stood about 7 feet high and was about 4 feet in diameter. Fortunately, I remember to have it made longitudinally in 2 halves, or else we should never have got it through the doorways and down the cellar stairs. I told the wiresmith to bring the cage up to the house so he could fit the 2 halves rigidly together. As we returned, I called in at an ironmonger's, where I bought some thin hemp rope and an iron rack pulley, like those used in Lancashire for hauling up the ceiling clothes racks, which you'll find in every cottage. I bought also a couple of pitchforks. "We shan't want to touch it," I said to the landlord, and he nodded, rather white all at once. As soon as the cage arrived and had been fitted together in the cellar, I sent away the smith, and the landlord and I suspended it over the well, into which it fitted easily. After a lot of trouble, we managed to hang it so perfectly central from the rope over the iron pulley that when hoisted to the ceiling and dropped, it went every time plunk into the well like a candle extinguisher. When we finally had it arranged, I hoisted it up once more to the ready position and made the rope fast to a heavy wooden pillar which stood in the middle of the cellar. By 10 o'clock I had everything arranged, and with 2 pitchforks and the 2 police lanterns, also some whiskey and sandwiches, essential supplies for ghost busting. Underneath the table I had several buckets full of disinfectant. A little after 11 o'clock there was a knock at the front door, and when I went I found Inspector Johnston had arrived and brought with him one of his plainclothesmen. You will understand how pleased I was to see that there was to be this addition to our watch, for he looked a tough, nerveless man, brainy and collected, and one I should have picked to help us with the horrible job I felt pretty sure we would have to do that night. When the inspector and the detective had entered, I shut and locked the front door. Then, while the inspector held the light, I sealed the door carefully with tape and wax. At the head of the cellar stairs, I shut and locked that door also, and sealed it in the same way. We'll just take a moment to appreciate the fact that basically 2 coppers, 1 plainclothes detective and an inspector, are moonlighting overnight in a ghost hunt. I love it. As we entered the cellar, I warned Johnston and his man to be careful not to fall over the wires, and then, as I saw his surprise at my arrangements, I began to explain my ideas and intentions, to all of which he listened with strong approval. I was pleased to see also that the detective was nodding his head as I talked, in a way that showed he appreciated all my precautions. As he put his lantern down, the inspector picked up one of the pitchforks and balanced it in his hand. He looked at me and nodded. "Best thing," he said. "I only wish you'd got 2 more." Then we all took our seats, the detective getting a washing stool from the corner of the cellar. From then until 11:45 we talked quietly, while we made a light supper of whiskey and sandwiches, after which we cleared everything off the table, excepting the lanterns and the pitchforks. One of the latter I handed to the inspector, the other I took myself. And then, having set my chair so as to be handy to the rope which lowered the cage into the well, I went round the cellar and put out every lamp. That's kind of tricky. Has Carnacki commissioned a giant egg slicer contraption? It's not a million miles off. I'm just thinking he's now going around the cellar, putting out all the lamps in the dark with piano wire strung in a grid every at shin height. This has every potential to go horribly wrong. I groped my way to the chair and arranged the pitchfork and the dark lantern ready to my hand, after which I suggested that everyone should keep an absolute silence throughout the watch. I asked also that no lantern should be turned on until I gave the word. Ouchy legs indeed, Alia. I put my watch on the table, where a faint glow from my lantern made me able to see the time. For an hour nothing happened, and everyone kept an absolute silence except for an occasional uneasy movement. About 1:30, however, I was conscious again of the same extraordinary and peculiar nervousness. Yeah, I was thinking that, Chrono. It was the groped his way back. I suddenly thought, oh my god, he's doing this in the dark. I was conscious again of the same extraordinary and peculiar nervousness which I'd felt on the previous night. I put my hand out quickly and eased the hitch rope from around the pillar. The inspector seemed aware of the movement, for I saw the faint light from his lantern move a little, as if he'd suddenly taken hold of it in readiness. A minute later, I noticed there was a change in the colour of the night in the cellar, and it grew slowly violet-tinted upon my eyes. I glanced to and fro quickly in the new darkness, and even as I looked, I was conscious that the violet colour deepened, in the direction of the well, but seeming to be at a great distance. There was, as it were, a nucleus to the change, and the nucleus came swiftly towards us, appearing to come from a great space, almost in a single moment. It came near, and I saw again that it was a naked little child, running and seeming to be of the violet night in which it ran. The child came with a natural running movement, exactly as I described before, but in a silence so peculiarly intense that it was as if it had brought the silence with it. About halfway between the well and the table, the child turned swiftly and looked back at something invisible to me, and suddenly it went down into a crouching attitude, and seemed to be hiding behind something that showed vaguely, but there was nothing there except the bare floor of the cellar. Nothing, I mean, of our world. I could hear the breathing of the three other men with a wonderful distinctiveness, and also the tick of my watch upon the table seemed to sound as loud and slow as the tick of an old grandfather clock. Some way I knew that none of the others saw what I was seeing. Abruptly, the landlord, who was next to me, let out his breath with a little hissing sound. I knew then that something was visible to him. There came a creak from the table, and I had a feeling that the inspector was leaning forward, looking at something I could not see. The landlord reached out his hand through the darkness and fumbled a moment to catch my arm. "The woman!" he whispered, close to my ear. "Over by the well!" I stared hard in that direction, but saw nothing except that the violet colour of the cellar seemed a little duller just there. I looked back quickly to the vague place where the child was hiding. I saw it was peering back from its hiding place. Suddenly it rose and ran straight for the middle of the table, which showed only as vague shadow halfway between my eyes and the unseen floor. As the child ran under the table, the steel prongs of my pitchfork glimmered with a violet fluctuating light. A little way off there showed high up in the gloom the vaguely shining outline of the other fork, so I knew the inspector had it raised in his hand, ready. There was no doubt but that he saw something. On the table, the metal of the 5 lanterns shone with the same strange glow, and about each lantern there was a little cloud of absolute blackness, where the phenomenon that is light to our natural eyes came through the fittings, and in this complete darkness the metal of each lantern showed plain, as might a cat's eye in a nest of black cotton wool. Just beyond the table, the child paused again and stood, seeming to oscillate a little upon its feet, which gave the impression it was lighter and vaguer than a thistledown. And yet in the same moment another part of me seemed to know that it was to me as something that might be beyond thick invisible glass, and subject to conditions and forces that I was unable to comprehend. The child was looking back again, and my gaze went the same way. I stared across the cellar, and saw the cage hanging clear in the violet light, every wire and tie outlined with its glimmering. Above it there was a little space of gloom, and then the dull shining of the iron pulley which I had screwed into the ceiling. I stared in a bewildered way around the cellar. There were thin lines of vague fire crossing the floor in all directions, and suddenly I remembered the piano wire that the landlord and I had stretched. But there was nothing else to be seen, except that near the table there was an indistinct glimmer of light, and at the far end the outline of a dull glowing revolver, evidently in the detective's pocket. I remember a sort of subconscious satisfaction as I settled the point in queer automatic fashion. On the table near to me there was a little shapeless collection of the light, and this I knew, after an instant's consideration, to be the steel portions of my watch. I'd looked several times at the child and round at the cellar whilst I was deciding these trifles, and had found it still in that attitude of hiding from something. But now suddenly it ran clear away into the distance, and was nothing more than a slightly deeper coloured nucleus far away in the strange coloured atmosphere. The landlord gave out a queer little cry and twisted over against me as if to avoid something. From the inspector there came a sharp breathing sound, as if he'd been suddenly drenched with cold water, and then suddenly the violet colour went out of the night, and I was conscious of the nearness of something monstrous and repugnant. There was a tense silence, and the blackness of the cellar seemed absolute, with only the faint glow about each of the lanterns on the table. Then, in the darkness and the silence, there came a faint tinkle of water from the well, as if something were rising noiselessly out of it, and the water running back with a gentle tinkling. In the same instant there came to me a sudden waft of the awful smell. I gave a sharp cry of warning to the inspector and loosed the rope. There came instantly the sharp splash of the cage entering the water, and then, with a stiff, frightened movement, I opened the shutter of my lantern and shone the light at the cage, shouting to the others to do the same. As my light struck the cage, I saw that about 2 feet of it projected from the top of the well, and there was something protruding up out of the water into the cage. I stared with a feeling that I recognized the thing, and then as the other lanterns were opened, I saw that it was a leg of mutton. The thing was held by a brawny fist and arm that rose out of the water. I stood utterly bewildered, watching to see what was coming. In a moment there rose into view a great bearded face that I felt for one quick instant was the face of a drowned man long dead. Then the face opened at the mouth part and sputtered and coughed. Another big hand came into view and wiped the water from the eyes, which blinked rapidly and then fixed themselves into a stare at the lights. From the detective there came a sudden shout. "Captain Tobias!" he shouted, and then the inspector echoed him and instantly burst into loud roars of laughter. The inspector and the detective ran across the cellar to the cage. I'm quite impressed by that, given the whole piano wire situation. I followed, bewildered. The man in the cage was holding the leg of mutton as far away from him as possible and holding his nose. "Lift this damn trap, quick!" he shouted in a stifled voice, but the inspector and the detective simply doubled up before him and tried to hold their noses while they laughed, and the light from the lanterns went dancing all over the place. "Quick, quick!" said the man in the cage, still holding his nose and trying to speak plainly. Then Johnston and the detective stopped laughing and lifted the cage. The man in the well threw the leg across the cellar and turned swiftly to go down into the well, but the officers were too quick for him and had him out in a twinkling. Whilst they held him, dripping upon the floor, the inspector jerked his thumb in the direction of the offending leg, and the landlord, having harpooned it with one of the pitchforks, ran with it upstairs and so into the open air. Meanwhile, I had given the man from the well a stiff tot of whisky, for which he thanked me with a cheerful nod, and having emptied the glass at a draught, held his hand for the bottle, which he finished as if it had been so much water. As you will remember, it was a Captain Tobias who had been the previous tenant, and this was the very man who had appeared from the well. In the course of the talk that followed, I learned the reason for Captain Tobias leaving the house. He had been wanted by the police for smuggling. He had undergone imprisonment and had been released only a couple of weeks earlier. He'd returned to find new tenants in his old home. He'd entered the house through the well, the walls of which were not continued to the bottom, this I will deal with later, and gone up by a little stairway in the cellar wall, which opened at the top through a panel beside my mother's bedroom. This panel was opened by revolving the left doorpost of the bedroom door, with the result that the bedroom door always became unlatched in the process of opening the panel. Proof that you don't need a huge, great manor house to have secret passages in old houses. The captain complained, without any bitterness, that the panel had warped and that each time he opened it, it made a cracking noise. This had evidently been what I mistook for raps. He would not give his reason for entering the house, but it was pretty obvious that he had hidden something which he wanted to get. However, as he found it impossible to get into the house without the risk of being caught, he decided to try to drive us out, relying on the bad reputation of the house and his own artistic efforts as a ghost. I must say he succeeded. He intended then to rent the house again, as before, and would then, of course, have plenty of time to get whatever he had hidden. The house suited him admirably, for there was a passage, as he showed me afterwards, connecting the dummy well with the crypt of the church beyond the garden wall, and these in turn were connected with certain caves in the cliffs, which went down to the beach beyond the church. I'm going to address fish here. Am I the only one who's getting really strong vibes of Botany Bay in Cliftonville? Because, of course, you've got the smugglers' caves and tunnels in the chalk cliffs there. Yeah, good. I'm glad it's not just me. Kate B, you're always fascinated with the laundry chute in your grandparents' house. It wasn't a proper chute, just a hole in the cabinet under the sink that let you drop laundry down on top of the washing machine. Interesting. That's, yeah, interesting design. And how old the house was. In the course of his talk, Captain Tobias offered to take the house off my hands. And as this suited me perfectly, for I was about stalled with it, and the plan also suited the landlord, it was decided that no steps should be taken against him, and that the whole business should be hushed up. I asked the captain whether there was really anything queer about the house, whether he had ever seen anything. He said yes, he had twice seen a woman going about the house. We all looked at one another when the captain said that. He told us she never bothered him, and that he had only seen her twice, and on each occasion it had followed a narrow escape from the revenue people. Captain Tobias was an observant man. He had seen how I would place the mats against the doors, and after entering the rooms and walking all about them, so as to leave the footmarks of an old pair of wet woolen slippers everywhere, he had deliberately put the mats back as he found them. The maggot which had dropped from his disgusting leg of mutton had been an accident, and beyond even his horrible planning. He was hugely delighted to learn how it had affected us. The mouldy smell I'd noticed was from a little closed stairway, when the captain opened the panel. The door slamming was also another of his contributions. I come now to the end of the captain's ghost play, and to the difficulty of trying to explain the other peculiar things. In the first place, it was obvious that there was something genuinely strange in the house, which made itself manifest as a woman. Many different people had seen this woman under differing circumstances, so it's impossible to put the thing down to fancy. At the same time, it must seem extraordinary that I should have lived 2 years in the house and seen nothing. Whilst the policeman saw the woman before he'd been there 20 minutes, the landlord, the detective, and the inspector all saw her. I can only surmise that fear was in every case the key, as I might say, which opened the senses to the presence of the woman. The policeman was a highly strung man, and when he had become frightened was able to see the woman. The same reasoning applies all round. I saw nothing until I became really frightened. Then I saw not the woman, but a child running away from something or someone. However, I will touch on that later. In short, until a very strong degree of fear was present, no one was affected by the force which made itself evident as a woman. My theory explains why some tenants were never aware of anything strange in the house, whilst others left immediately. The more sensitive they were, the less would be the degree of fear necessary to make them aware of the force present in the house. And the peculiar shining of all the metal objects in the cellar had been visible only to me. The cause, naturally, I do not know, neither do I know why I alone was able to see the shining. The child, I asked. Can you explain that part at all? Why you didn't see the woman, and why they didn't see the child? Was it merely the same force appearing differently to different people? No, said Carnacki. I can't explain that. But I am quite sure that the woman and the child were not only two complete and different entities, but even that they were each not in quite the same planes of existence. To give you a root idea, however, it's held in the Sigsum manuscript that a child stillborn is snatched back by the hags. This is crude, but may yet contain an elemental truth. Yet before I make this clearer, let me tell you a thought that's often been made. It may be that physical birth is but a secondary process, and that prior to the possibility, the mother spirit searches for until it finds the small element, the primal ego or child's soul. It may be that a certain waywardness would cause such to strive to evade capture by the mother spirit. It may have been such a thing as this, as I saw. I've always tried to think so, but it's impossible to ignore the sense of repulsion that I felt when the unseen woman went past me. This repulsion carries forward the idea suggested in the Sigsum manuscript that a stillborn child is thus because its ego or spirit has been snatched back by the hags. In other words, by certain of the monstrosities of the outer circle. The thought's inconceivably terrible, and probably the more so because it's so fragmentary. It leaves us with the conception of a child's soul half adrift between two lives. and running through eternity from something incredible and inconceivable because not understood to our senses. The thing is beyond further discussion, for it's futile to attempt to discuss a thing to any purpose of which one has a knowledge so fragmentary as this. There is one thought which is often mine. Perhaps there is a mother spirit. "And the well," said Arkwright. "How did the captain get in from the other side?" "As I said before," answered Carnacki, "the side walls of the well did not reach to the bottom, so that you only had to dip down into the water and come up again on the other side of the wall under the cellar floor, and so climb into the passage. Of course, the water was the same height on both sides of the walls. Don't ask me who made the well entrance or the little stairway, for I don't know. The house was very old, as I've told you, and that sort of thing was useful in the old days." "Hello, hi." "And the child," I said, coming back to the thing which chiefly interested me. "You would say the birth must have occurred in that house, and in this way one might suppose that the house to have become en rapport, if I can use the word in that way, with the forces that produced the tragedy?" "Yes," replied Carnacki. "That is, supposing we take the suggestion of the Sigson manuscript to account for the phenomenon." "There may be other houses," I began. "There are," said Carnacki, and stood up. "Out you go," he said genially, using the recognised formula, and in 5 minutes we were on the embankment, going thoughtfully to our various homes. And there we have the end. I hope you enjoyed that. It's a very odd little story, and one that I very much like. But it's a weirdie. It grew on me. It's one I'd really like to see adapted to TV, because, you know, the anti-light and glowing metals, that could make a really interesting visual, especially, you know, the network of piano wires on the floor in the end scene. That would be cool. It is definitely a weird one. William Hope Hodgson, he really was one of those doing cosmic horror. I'm not sure, I don't think he was one of Lovecraft's contemporaries, or correspondents rather, because he's, if nothing else, he's too much of an egotist, and I don't think he had the time. But he really, really, really nailed the cosmic horror of ghost stories. Kate B, it's lovely. You're trying to find your grandparents' house on Google Earth. You want to see if you can find out when it was built. I would genuinely be quite interested. But no, you don't think it has a satisfactory conclusion for the supernatural elements for TV, though, unless they rewrote it. Yeah, there's an awful lot in the Carnacki stories of, this is what I think was happening, but I'm really not sure. But, you know, we're just gonna take this, which was quoted in the Sigsund manuscript. Who the hell was Sigsund? I need to do some research as to whether this person actually existed. You know, are we talking an Anton LaVey character, or is this someone just made up whole cloth? Because the Sigsund manuscript is referenced a lot in the Carnacki stories. Alia, you like the split spirits, the idea that neither on the normal plane, but they're also not on the same not normal plane. Yeah. I quite like the idea that basically you could have different brain types, maybe, that would let you see one or t'other. And I would really love to know, given that they didn't get the purple glow and the glowing metal, I'd love to know what the police and the landlord saw in addition to the ghost. Did they just get, you know, a darkened room with the ghost, or did they get something weird in a different direction, weirder in a different direction? I think it's got some potential though. Right, I will call that there then. I'm glad you enjoyed it. There's a lot to William Hope Hodgson. Next week, I have a choice. I'm happy to start someone new or move to a different book. However, if I can get hold of a copy of the one story that bizarrely isn't in this complete works of William Hope Hodgson, but does furnish a monster that features in the second Call of Cthulhu bestiary, which is the Hog. It's quite a long one. It's probably slightly longer than this. And it's one that you could never adapt to TV as is, because the visuals would just be silly. Slogging around in effectively rubber wetsuits. But as a concept, it's really effective, and it's got some very chilling moments. And it's kind of an excellent conclusion to the whole cosmic horror end of things. So I will leave you guys to decide whether or not you would like that, or whether you'd like me to move on to something new. If you have any ideas or any thoughts, please drop them into my channel in the Discord. And now I will sign off here and go and get ready for game stream, which is going to be The Sinking City 2. Obviously a sequel to The Sinking City, released today. I gather there are some streams have already happened, but not many. So it's going to be, hopefully, very interesting, hopefully. The demo game I played a little while ago, is basically the opening point of the game. But since I've been through it a couple of times, I should be able to knock that off fairly quickly. Oh my god, there are squiddy tentacles. There are squiddy tentacles, there are wormy tentacles, there are tentacles everywhere. This is definitely a horror with investigative elements, whereas The Sinking City 1 was an investigative game with strong horror elements. But they are in the same world. And I believe Charles Reed gets a couple of references, sort of obliquely. More than 10 tentacles? Oh, mate. You've not seen tentacles like this before. The 30 seconds or so you've seen include large skinless worms and an animated corpse. Yep, you didn't even see the translator. Good lordy dicks. Right. So I will shoo you off, and hopefully I will have Fishy and Chrono providing Peanut Gallery commentary, which I am quite looking forward to. So I will see you guys shortly, probably about 20 minutes, I think, to change everything over and sort some coffee. And so, you've seen the streamer with poor aim. Oh no. Yeah, I will be running with aim assist on, I'm just going to say. Because it's not easy, but even aim assist is not a guaranteed hit, let's put it that way. Right, we will go through that though when running. So thank you very much indeed. Your presence is much appreciated. For those of you obviously not following the channel, a follow on Twitch and a sub on YouTube would be much appreciated. I am Druttercup on both, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on ko-fi.com/Druttercup, which helps me keep the lights on and pay for all the ebooks I'm having to buy for my book club, amongst other things. You know, Drut's a good sniper. Yeah, I'm not bad, but oh, these things do not respect personal space, is all I'm going to say. Yeesh. Right. I will see you guys around, hopefully, in about 20 minutes or so. So, thank you very much, and later.